Great. Thank you very much, Marcy. And a special thanks to all of you, the members of the public that are participating in this workshop today. This is one of several opportunities that you will have to participate. I really encourage you, your neighbors, and your friends to participate in this liquid waste management planning process. The sewer system is an essential service. It provides essential services not only to the residents of Comox and Courtenay, but all of the Comox Valley. We depend on its service to provide for our hospital, our schools, our businesses, our commerce throughout the Comox and Courtenay area that all of us take advantage of and require. A liquid waste management planning process is comprehensive, and I wish to thank those that have been involved in this process, in particular those in the Public Advisory Committee, members of the public that have come forward to spend the time to help us in order to get to where we are today. It is about addressing our pipes, our pumps, and our treatment at Brent Road. Today, our focus may be on conveyance because it is one of the most essential parts of this service. It is essential that we resolve the issues surrounding the conveyance of sewage along Balmoral Bluffs. We are looking for the opportunity to provide an alternative to that and move forward with that project. It is a significant cost to the residents and businesses of the City of Courtenay and the town of Comox, so we have to get it right. And through this engagement process and through the liquid waste management planning process, we're on that journey. Your input is important. Please take the advantage today to ask your questions. If for some reason you don't get that opportunity, take the many opportunities to provide your feedback in the other workshops and the opportunities we provide you online. We are fortunate to have a dedicated group of staff and consultants available today to help to answer your questions. I am very impressed with the work that has been completed today. We have some of the best quality consultants on this project in order to answer your questions and to provide us with the technical background in order to meet these tough decisions. We are in unprecedented times, and again, we need to move these projects forward, and these projects need public input. So again, I wish to thank you for your participation today. Please fill out the survey online, give us your questions, give us your comments. I encourage you to be part of this process, and again, wish to thank you very much for taking this time.
Wonderful. We'll be moving to Chris LaRose for the presentation. Chris, if you'd like to do an introduction, I'll pull up your slides shortly.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Marcy. So my name is Chris LaRose. I'm the Senior Manager of Water and Wastewater here at the CVRD. And yeah, thanks everyone for attending. And for helping us trial this virtual open house format. So yeah, without further ado, so the LWMP kicked off in 2018 with public sessions that June to help understand the public's priorities with respect to management of sewer in the valley. And the first meetings of the technical and public advisory committees took place that fall in September. And in early 2019, a long list for conveyance and treatment options was selected. And the rest of the year was focused on technical assessment of the long list and consultation with our partners, the Comox First Nation, residents, and stakeholders. After a pause due to COVID this year, we are now consulting on the 3 shortlisted conveyance options. So the results of this consultation will be reported back to our technical and public advisory committees to inform their recommendation of a preferred solution, which would then be taken to the Sewage Commission towards the end of this year. So the preferred solution will be chosen late this year, and an alternate approval process, or AAP, to fund the conveyance portion of the system will likely occur in early 2021. So this would allow us to remove the at-risk sewer pipe along the bottom of Balmoral Bluffs by late 2022 or early 2023. So my objective for the next few slides is to provide information about the 3 shortlisted options and additional information to assist you with filling out the online survey. So as Russell mentioned, the survey is a key part of our consultation process and will provide us with a record of your feedback. And one more important note before getting to the shortlisted options: the estimated costs at this stage are based on the current market conditions, When a preferred option is chosen, the next stage in parallel and after the AEP will be to enter the detailed design phase, at which point the cost will be further refined and some changes to the final costs are to be expected. So moving to the next slide. So this map shows the anticipated alignment for option 1. So option 1 is a traditional cut and cover force main installation. So I say traditional because that is the default type of installation, which involves trenching, putting in bedding material, installing the pipe, and then backfilling, and then repaving. So this alignment takes us along the Comox Road, Comox Avenue, through the town, following Beaufort, Stewart, Balmoral, and then along Lazo and Moreland Road before a very short section of horizontal directional drilled pipe, so a form of tunneling underneath the Lazo Marsh to minimize any impacts to that sensitive area. So the construction impact for this option is assessed at medium, as it will be single lane alternating along much of that alignment as the construction moves along the alignment. So this no doubt will be, will come along with significant disruptions to residents and businesses, but work will progress continuously and we're not anticipating any full closures of these roads. So key to understand about this option is that the pipe will necessarily be going up and over the 40-meter elevation of Comox Hill and the 55-meter elevation of Lazo Hill. So this will significantly increase the pumping power required to get the wastewater from the city and the town to the treatment plant, because the current pipe runs along the intertidal zone and largely at sea level before it pops up to the plant near Curtis Road. So the costs for this option are anticipated at $65 million in initial capital costs, and approximately 17 million over 30 years of operating and maintaining and asset replacement for this option. So when you break that down to cost per household, we're looking at approximately $240 per year increase per property for the 20-year borrowing term. So from the pros and cons, so the benefits of this option are that it's seen as a lower risk construction approach, because as you'll see, the subsequent two options do involve a greater element of tunneling, which does come along with a bit of a higher construction risk. And another benefit is that it removes all the foreshore, all the pipe that's in the existing intertidal zone right from the start. Challenges with this one are that because of the heights of land that the waters will be required to be pumped up and over, and effectively in perpetuity, the upgrades at the 2 pump stations or the 3 pump stations are much more significant to handle the bigger pumps to push it up and over the higher heights of land. The second challenge would be the higher life cycle costs, because we would have to install higher or larger pumps. There'd be much higher electrical costs, power costs over the life of the project. And finally, this option involves roadway construction along the entire route. Option 2 and 3 do include the higher element of tunneling, which does remove some roadway construction, as we'll see in the subsequent slide. Next slide, please. So this map shows an overview of option 2. So option 2 follows a very similar alignment to option 1, and the exception being the under the 2 heights of land. So instead of going up and over like in option 1, the plan here would be to tunnel using horizontal directional drilling through the 2 heights of land to reduce that maximum elevation that we are required to pump the wastewater up and over. So so it's a combination of the traditional cut and cover and then those 2 sections of tunneling. So as far as construction impacts go, along Comox Road and through Comox Avenue, Beaufort, Stewart, and Moreland, we're seeing single lane alternating traffic. But for this option, we've actually marked a few areas as high construction impact. Those would be the areas identified as orange on this map. because of the laydown areas required for the pipe as it's assembled before being drawn through the hill. So single lane closures would be longer in this area because they would see both the cut and cover and the pipe laydown, and there actually may be periods of local traffic only. So instead of single lane alternating, just restricting traffic to people who live along those specific sections. So the costs for this one are slightly lower than option one, so estimated at 58 million. And a significantly lower cost to run and maintain, estimated at 13 million over 30 years. And that's a reflection of that lower anticipated power costs. And then that translates to again, a slightly lower cost per household of approximately $210 per year per household over the 20-year borrowing term. Benefits for this option are those lower life cycle costs, less construction footprint because we are avoiding the cut and cover along or underneath, over top of the tunneled sections. And it also, similarly to option one, doesn't involve removing all of the foreshore pipe at the start. So we know that is of concern to some members of the public. And challenges with this one are an increased construction risk due to the unknowns inherent to tunneling. So we've undertaken significant geotechnical work in these areas, but it's impossible to fully verify exactly what conditions will be encountered underground by the tunneling operation. There's also additional rights of way required for the two tunneled options. So the need to negotiate with landowners to secure statutory rights of way for the pipe that would pass underneath their properties. Next slide, please. So here's a map of option three. So it's essentially the same as option two, but it's broken into two phases. So one would be completed as soon as possible to replace the Willamar Bluffs line. So that's being the key driver for this project, is to resolve that environmental risk posed by that pipe that is prone to exposure along below the Willamar Bluffs section of force main. And then the other section, which would be, as you can see, the line draws the boundary there. So approximately from a tie-in in Marina Park, everything to the west would be installed once the pipe, the existing pipe along that section reaches the end of its expected lifespan. So phase one would be, it would involve a tie-in to that existing pipe in Marina Park, likely in one part of the boat launch parking lot, timed to minimize any impact on the use of that amenity. And then a temporary line up to Beaufort, where then that permanent line would continue on from that point, and from that point on look very much like option two. And then in 15 or 20 years, which is what we expect the remaining life of that force main, that second phase of work would occur and complete the removal of the pipe from the estuary. From the cost side of things, this one comes along with a significantly lower initial capital cost. In other words, the long-term costs are anticipated to be roughly similar to option two, but we have the ability with the phasing to spread those costs out over a much longer time frame. And as you'll see, this translates to a significantly lower anticipated cost per household. So similar cost to run and maintain as option two, but the cost per household with that ability to spread the capital costs out over a longer time frame are down to roughly $160 per household until that second phase of work is done in roughly 20 years from now. So benefits of this one are that they address the urgent environmental risk. They reduce the short-term, the capital costs, so by spreading them out over that longer time frame. There's a lower operating life cycle cost, similar in line with option two. We maximize the lifespan of the existing infrastructure, so which in addition to allowing us to spread out the capital costs of this work over a longer time frame, also delivers a piece of infrastructure that will then last an additional 20 years, in the more distant future. And then reduced construction impact. So that's in line with option two, but also because we'd be splitting the construction impacts of the entire project into 2 phases. So the community would not have to suffer through work along that entire alignment right away. That those impacts could be also spread over the decades. Challenges with this one are that a portion of the foreshore pipe remains in the estuary, and as I mentioned earlier, we do acknowledge that some community members do feel that that poses an environmental risk. There's some challenge in the connection at Marina Park because that pipe needs to stay live because of the nature of this pumping system. That connection would have to take place with that pipe in operation using a process called hot tapping. So there's some challenge associated with that, but technically surmountable, we are assured. And then the increased construction risk that comes along with both of these tunneling options, and the additional laydown area that's required for both tunneling options as well. And finally, for all of these options, we are focused on anticipating and fully mitigating all impacts to groundwater along the entire alignment, but which we know are of particular concern to residents in the portion of Area B along Lazo Road and Moreland, who rely entirely on groundwater for all of their potable water needs. So regardless of the option selected, we're committed to implementing best engineering practice in the design and construction of this work, working to establish a baseline of water quality and quantity in the area prior to construction, and then monitoring some of those wells for impacts during and after construction, and then fully working to resolve any issues that are encountered. So that's the overview of the options that are being discussed, the shortlisted options. And I pass you back to Marcy to manage the questions coming in on the chat, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We've had some questions come through on the chat, which is great. We're also noticing some people asking questions directly to Colleen, but do post your questions in the chat so everyone can see them. So we'll start with the first question, which is related to the trees along Balmoral Avenue. And our guest or participant is asking, what are the plans to protect the trees and avoid excuse me, damage to them?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. I'll take a go at that. So so we have had some concerns expressed from residents along Balmoral and also along other sections of the alignment about the impact on large and highly valued trees along the edge of the road right of way or within. So in one of the first steps in developing a design for an alignment like this is developing cross sections and working through the constraints of both the existing utilities in the road, but also items like large valued trees to select a alignment that minimizes any potential impact on those large and valued trees. So that's definitely something we will be taking into close consideration and working to mitigate or minimize.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to go to one of the questions that was sent to the tech question, but I think it's a valuable question to share with everyone. And the question is, in terms of the length of construction, what is the anticipated timeline for each option?
I think the anticipated timeline is approximately on the 18 to 24 month period. There could be, I mean, the option 3 would likely have the shortest complete duration of construction. So we might expect that to be on the potentially towards the lower range of that duration, with options 1 and 2, around the 2-year mark. But for any given section of the alignment, we would expect the impacts to be of significantly shorter duration as the work moves through your area.
Great, thank you. Another question, what public consultation opportunities were made available following the release of the long list options?
Hello, seeing if I can unmute myself there. So for the long list options, we had opportunities very similar to what we have available for this shortlist conveyance consultation. At the end of January 2019, we brought the long list forward to the public, and we had an opportunity for input via an online survey, and we held 2 open houses, one in Comox and one in Courtney, to review the list. And that feedback was brought back to the Sewage Commission as part of their consideration to narrow these options down to a short list.
Wonderful, thanks, Christiane. The next question was reinforcing the existing system discussed as an option.
Sure. So I take that to mean, did we look at strengthening the existing pipe? And yes, you know, initially we did look at, we discussed options of relining the pipe, so which involves blowing an epoxy lined kind of liner into the existing pipe. We've been heavily constrained by the reality of the situation along the Balmoral Bluffs. You know, we have a situation there where the wave action, that section is so exposed that the waves, particularly during the big winter storms, we get really hammer that beach, and there's a strong migration of material along the beach out towards the spit. If you have ever taken a look at the spit from an aerial photograph, you can just see how that spit has been generated from the flow of materials from Point Holmes along the Balmoral Bluffs and out kind of into the estuary. So I guess the implication is that we see a declining depth of cover over that pipe, to the extent that we do an annual depth of cover survey to track that depth of cover, because the less cover there is and over that pipe, the more susceptible it is to impacts, abrasion by rocks or logs being pounded into it during one of those storms. So it's not been deemed to be technically possible to strengthen that pipe to the extent that it could be left along that section of force main. So that's definitely been a major driver and a constraint to the process.
Okay, thank you, Chris. We have some specific questions diving into options 2 and 3. What exactly would be the impact of construction on those 2 options for the section of road between Port Augusta to Stewart? And perhaps I'll just bring up the map if that's helpful again for 2 and 3. Here we go. So let me know, Chris, if you'd like to.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Marcy. So the impacts to construction there. So that's a section of cut and cover installation, regardless of what option is being considered. The difference between the options there would be. Sorry. I guess the question was from Port Augusta. So that would be common to all 3. So it's cut and cover construction, depending on the exact alignment or the cross section, like where the pipe will be running down the road. The impacts to either side could be different, but one of our kind of objectives is to if as much as possible, run the pipe down the middle of the road to allow steady, uninterrupted access to driveways for local traffic along those areas. So what it would look like would be a period of several weeks to between a month or 2 of, you know, intensive construction activity with, you know, many trucks and excavators and other pieces of mobile equipment working to dig the trench, lay down bedding material, install the pipe, and cover it up compact. There could be a period where the backfill trench is covered with gravel or temporary patching, and then in larger pieces, repaving. So repaving the final repaving could take place sometime after, with some type of temporary patch in place. Yeah, I think that's that's a pretty good sense of what that would look like. So several weeks to between a month or two of direct impact, and then sometime after that for final cleanup. So there's also the potential of working together with the town of Comox as part of this process to identify synergies with work that they already have planned. So I don't have any specific notes about Beaufort, but it is possible that the town could take the opportunity to increase the amenities along sections of the town alignment, rebuilding sidewalks, undergrounding power, that type of thing. So that could impact the timeline and exactly what that process could look like.
Thanks, Chris. Question about option 3. Isn't the section of pipe slated in phase 2 needed now due to current increased demand?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good question. So the what's been highlighted to us, and with the assistance of our team at WSP and represented by Carol here on the phone today, is that the original pipe was actually in some ways oversized. So the size of it is not a driver for this work. That pipe we're very comfortable with the anticipated projected growth in population and wastewater generation in the community, that pipe will easily be able to handle the increased flows expected over that time frame.
Okay, we're moving right along. We've got lots of time for everyone's question. We've got a question from a guest talking about the man waiting hours for the public. I assume that's for all 3 options. Asking about what's the cost of the waiting to the communities involved.
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understood the
Yeah.
cost. Yeah.
I'm guessing it's about construction and causing delays for traffic and people moving through the zones. And just the question is, what is the cost of that to the community? Or have you considered that cost in your choice of these 3 options?
For sure. So maybe if I could paraphrase, so have we closely considered the impacts that the construction will have on the community? So I think the answer is absolutely yes. We're focusing on that in our communications with the public. We want the public to understand the extent of the impacts that will be felt by the community during the project. So that you can participate in sessions like these and bring to our attention specific impacts such as the interference with tree roots and impacts on businesses, so that we can work through those impacts and mitigate them. So yes, we've definitely and even in selection of these options, I know I had an emphasis on the height of land as being a key driver for tunneling, but that reducing the length of total impacted roadway was definitely a priority there as well. We took a close look at potentially expanding the use of tunneling or horizontal directional drilling to further reduce the impact of construction impacts on the community, and felt that had increased costs very significantly, and that we should be able to, through proper traffic management consultation with local residents and businesses, develop a traffic management plan that should be manageable for the community.
Thank you, Chris. I'll mention there's a lot of questions coming in, which is great. Any questions that we don't get to answer today, as I mentioned, will be added to a Q&A document that will be posted with the webinar on Connect CBRD. So not to worry, we'll get to everything. And in fact, we did have some earlier submitted questions by email that came through, and I'm going to jump to one of those now. And the question is, why is the cost to construct, run, and maintain greater for the overland option than for the tunneling option?
It's a complicated answer. Earlier in the consultation process at the long listing stage, the ranking in cost was actually reversed, and the tunneled the HDD alignment was anticipated to be slightly more expensive. We've taken the opportunity through this delay imposed by COVID this year to do more work with our team at WSP. And one of the outcomes from that work has been a higher level of design and analysis. And that has concluded that, well, I mean, there's a number of reasons that have caused the prices to shift. And I think it's worth noting as well, you know, that these cost estimates are at a Class C level, which is roughly plus or minus 30% accuracy. So when you're looking at two options that are, you know, 68 or 64 or 5 to 58, you know, those are within the margin of error. So that's just a note before I get to the rest. So in terms of the complexities that the factors that have gone into that shift in ranking, you know, one of them is that just a better understanding that while the tunneling unit rate, for example, is definitely quite a bit higher, you know, just over double what the unit rate is for cut and cover. There's actually a fair bit less alignment, because for those two sections, the pipe is running straight and not following the roadway. So there's a shorter alignment. There's also as I mentioned, a significantly larger upgrade required at the pump stations in order to meet the pressures to pump up and over Comox and Lazo Hills. So in other words, for the tunneled options, the level of upgrades required for the pump station is lower, because they're not having to pump up and over those hills. So I think I mentioned in the presentation, but the highest point of land in the cut and cover option is 55 meters approximately, whereas with the tunneled sections, we hope to get that down to 26 meters. So that's less than half of the height, and that translates into significantly less expensive upgrades at the pump stations.
Great. I've got a question here from a guest related to residents of Curtis Road who are below the wastewater facility. And their question is around compensation. They're wondering how homeowners in that area will be compensated for an increased load on the wastewater facility.
So did you mention Croto or Curtis?
Curtis Road.
Curtis Road. Okay. So speaking to the potential for increased impacts from more flows going through the plant,
Yeah, I think the question is
right?
around, will there be increased load and any associated negative impacts, and how will homeowners be compensated? So that's might be a bigger question than the scope of today, but I'll pass that one to you, Chris.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, as the community continues to grow, it is anticipated to generate more wastewater that will be conveyed to and treated at the treatment plant. However, that being said, we are, as Russell mentioned at the beginning of the session, the conveyance is just one component of this work, of the LWMP planning work. We're also focused on determining the appropriate level of treatment at the treatment plant, and so we do expect that level of treatment to increase through the addition of disinfection at the facility. We also early this year had the Sewage Commission approved covering of the bioreactors and treatment of that air through the chemical scrubber system, which is anticipated to significantly reduce the odors from that facility, if not almost eliminate them. So we're taking steps to minimize and mitigate impacts from today's levels, and certainly from the future levels to that neighborhood.
It's from a different guest, but it's maybe related. The question is, should a wastewater treatment plant be considered in Courtenay?
No, that's a great question. And the planning process, you know, at the start of the LWMP, as is typical for these processes, we really set out to cast the net far and wide when developing our long list of options. And one of the options that was put forth and included on the long list did involve adding a new plant in Courtenay. avoid, I mean, the thought I think behind the suggestion was to potentially avoid this conveyance issue, and also avoid having to further upgrade or upsize the capacity at the Brent Road facility. So that option was not carried forward to the short list because of the significant diseconomies of scale of building a second facility. If you compare the cost of building a new facility versus the cost of upgrading the existing one, you're looking at potentially 3 times higher costs. And not to mention that the only viable place for discharge of wastewater, even highly treated wastewater, is still seen and considered to be off of Cape Lazo. So while we may not have the same capacity pressures on this existing conveyance system, we would then have to run a separate line for treated effluent to go all the way from that facility out to the outfall off of Cape Lazo. So I think for those reasons, largely for those reasons, that option was not carried forward. Not to mention the siting of a new treatment plant in a highly developed area is a very daunting task.
Okay, I'm going to loop back to one of the email questions submitted. The question is it possible, and Chris, let me know if you need to pull up any maps again, is it
Sure.
possible for the overland option to be delivered in phases?
Sure, yeah, actually, Marcy, could you pull up the option 1 map, please?
Let's just get there now.
So that was closely looked at as well, and the issue there is that because of the need for the wastewater to be pushed up and over the heights of land, and as I mentioned, the impact of that is the much higher pumping requirements at the pump stations, and what that translates to is a much higher pressure in those pipes. So if you can imagine, that those pumps are having to push a lot harder to get the wastewater up and over the 55-meter height of land, and that translates to higher pressures in the pipe. And so the conclusion from WSP was that the required working pressure in the pipe in that kind of phase 1 area between the Courtney pump station and Comox would be essentially at or just below the working pressure limit for this type of pipe. And given that it is approaching 40 years old, and the sensitivities regarding the fact that it is located within the intertidal zone, that was not recommended. So in other words, too risky to increase the pressures in the existing pipe to what would be required to push it up and over the hill.
Okay, thank you. Question about the boat ramp. In option 3, for how long would the boat ramp be affected? I'm assuming that's in Comox. And how much of Marina Bay will be made unusable by families, I'm assuming during construction? If you can speak to the impact on Marina Park and the boat ramp, specifically for option 3. I can bring that up again as well.
For sure. Yep. So yeah, that would just be for option 3. So we've clearly flagged that as as a major issue, to manage and mitigate. So we've committed to the town council in a meeting earlier this year that work would occur off season to do exactly that, to mitigate the impact on the users of the boat launch and families using the park. So the tie-in itself, is the matter of weeks to a month or 2 of work. So I think the feeling is definitely that we can undertake that work in a time of year that would have minimal impact to the users of that amenity. And for those of you that are familiar with the parking lot down there at the boat launch, there is kind of 3 elements to it. So we would be restricting the work to one of those. So the boat launch would still be very much in operation, but the parking capacity would be reduced rather than eliminated.
Okay. We've got a question looking back to existing trees. Chris, you mentioned that to protect the existing trees, it was important to establish cross sections. and the best route. So while, it's a comment, while the locations of utilities should be known and mapped, wouldn't the position of tree roots be largely unknown? And if so, how can the route be optimally planned along the roadway?
Well, we have been here, as I mentioned, we have been hearing from residents and businesses who have flagged specific trees. But I won't say we're leaning entirely on people drawing them to our attention. But as the work progresses and more analysis and assessment is done along the alignment, we would definitely be looking to assess those impacts ourselves by the team. In other words, not leaning entirely on people drawing attention to trees that they are particularly concerned about.
Chris, we have a comment that might be worth some addressing, and that is talking about the 30% margin of error. I'm not sure if that's related to the cost estimates, but can you speak to how the estimates is a Class C? I'll just leave that one with you. There's some concern that that level of margin of error is high.
Yeah, so this is just inherent to the engineering design and the way these types of projects are developed. So the level of accuracy is tied to the level of design. So what that 30%, plus or minus roughly is reflective of is the level of design that's been done for this level of planning process. So design is expensive, and so what's required by the province for a liquid waste management planning process is a Class C cost estimate, which is that plus or minus 20 to 30, actually depending on the definition. There are a range of definitions out there, but they range between 20 to 40%, and that is closely tied to the level of design. So rather than undertaking a full detailed design for all of the options under consideration, which would be required if we were going to reduce that accuracy or improve the accuracy down to like the 5% mark, you would require a full detailed design, and that is a very expensive proposition and not typically done for planning exercises like this.
Okay, we have some questions related to cost that have come through the tech questions. So you won't see them in your chat, but these are, the first of those would be, how will the CPRD insure against escalating construction costs?
Well, that's a good question. I know that there's been plenty of high-profile projects that have seen significant escalations in costs. So the way that we mitigate against that is by working with reputable firms such as WSP, building in the appropriate level of contingencies into our estimates, which is crucial. And so a rough rule of thumb here is that the contingency is approximately equal to the level of accuracy. So in this case, we are carrying a 40% contingency on the cut and cover alignments and 60% for the tunneling. That's reflective of that higher construction risk that I mentioned. So contingency is crucial. When we're doing we take a lot of care in developing these estimates before we share them with the public through events like this, to ensure that when we are communicating a cost, we've thought of everything effectively in terms of what, so instead of providing a cost estimate in last year's dollars, we make sure that they're escalated to the midpoint of anticipated construction. We make sure that we've thought the entire process through and identified all possible cost pressures to make sure that those are included in the estimates before they're shared and used to authorize the project.
Now, for the participants and the guests, I haven't seen any thumbs up or applause reactions from you. I just hope you're all still there. Perhaps you're taking a breather. We are going fast and furious through the questions, so I'm just going to keep rolling here. We had some, I'm seeing something there. Okay, let's just keep going because we've got some time. And Chris, will the cost per household be a parcel tax lump sum per year or based on BC assessment? And feel free to call on any of your team for that, but I'll just leave that one with you.
Sure. Okay. And before I answer that, I do know that there's the tiers reaction down there too available for people if they feel so inclined. So in answer to your question, the cost would be passed through to the municipalities through the existing requisition. So we are estimating what that will translate to in terms of increases to the residents, to property owners. So yeah. So again, all Comox Valley Sewerage Service costs are recovered from the municipalities through an annual requisition. So the borrowing associated with implementation of this project would increase the annual cost through debt servicing, thereby increasing the amount that needs to be distributed between the property owners from each community. So we've worked with our municipal partners to develop this estimate per household. But it is just an estimate. Exactly how those costs will be translated into increased sewer fees in each community would be up to Courtney and Comox.
Okay, speaking of Comox, there is a question about, the question is, are there plans in place for along Balmoral Avenue on the south side to work with the town of Comox to install a sidewalk, potentially at the same time that the work is being done in that section? Now that might be a question for the town of Comox, but I'll throw it on the floor for you, Chris, if you have any input or insight on that idea.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to speak to specific improvements that are being considered. We're in the process of walking through potential opportunities with the town, but I know they have flagged specific improvements, including sidewalks, undergrounding of power, roundabout, bike lanes, that type of thing, along specific sections of the alignment. I just don't have the information in front of me about that specific section of Balmoral.
Okay, question, how will the HMCS Quadra pump station be tied into the new system?
That's a good question. So currently, the flows from HMCS Quadra are discharged to a sanitary manhole at the intersection of Torrance and Balmoral, and where there flows with the rest of the gravity collected wastewater from that part of the town through a gravity line to the Jane Place pump station. So the plan when the HMCS Quadra was built was that eventually that would be replaced with a discharge into the Comox 2 pump station. So now that project is no longer, and you'll note that there is no third pump station included in any of the shortlisted options. The expectation, I think, although this is yet to be confirmed with agreement with Comox, would be that that discharge to the existing town gravity line would continue, just on a more permanent basis.
Okay, question about the risk of tunneling. Isn't the risk very high? And does this risk greatly outweigh the cost savings between option 1 and option 2? And there's some suggestion that perhaps option 1 could be broken into 2 phases. Well, we've got the map up of option 1, so.
Okay, yeah, so maybe I'll address that second one. I mean, I did respond to that earlier. We've taken a very close look at option 1, and the consensus is that this one cannot be phased because of the high pressures that are imposed by pumping up and over the heights of land. So that one is off the table. So back to the first question. Sorry, what was the other piece to that, Marcy?
The risk of tunneling, isn't it very high, and does it outweigh the option or the overall $1 million cost savings between options 1 and 2?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So part of it is, so I did mention that much higher contingency. So the capital cost estimates that you've seen in the material distributed to date, and that I've summarized today in the presentation, does take into account that much significantly higher contingency that we're carrying for the tunneled options. So that's part of how we mitigate that risk. The other part is undertaking appropriate level of geotechnical work to confirm what the the conditions are very likely to be. So the more holes that are drilled, the higher the level of certainty about our awareness of the ground conditions. So we've worked extensively with WSP and their in-house tunneling expert to examine those results, and their consensus is that there's no red flags here, that the information would be provided to the tunneling contractors, and that they're confident that it can be carried out. Then the last piece is through selection of the project delivery method, so how we contract that tunneling operation, and looking for an optimum transfer of risk between the owner of the CVRD and the local taxpayers and the contractor. So that's yet to be finalized, but we do have multiple avenues there on how to kind of nail down, mitigate the risks of tunneling.
We are going to do a quick time check. We've got about 2 minutes, and there are a lot of folks that we haven't heard from. Perhaps all your questions are being answered, but I would encourage you now in these last few moments, if you're debating whether to post a question in the chat, please do. There are still some questions that haven't been answered, some that came in by email, some still in the chat. And so I'll just remind everyone that we will take those questions and create a Q&A doc, and we'll be posting it on the Connect CVRD website. I might just share a screen shot now, because there are opportunities. A lot of you might be signing off, but before you go, we do urge you and encourage you to fill in the online survey. This forum that we've been in today, it's not super great for sharing your feedback, but an online survey gives you lots of room, lots of time, and lots of space to really share your views on these 3 options. So I'm just going to bring up that information. Here we go. So if you're ready to comment, share your views, the survey is up online at connectcvrd.ca/WMP. You can fill out the survey, you can ask questions, you can even email engineering services directly or give them a call. There's also some live open houses planned in Comox and Courtney starting this week and going into next. So really, this is the chance to share your views. Hopefully many of your questions have been answered. I realize we didn't get to all of them, but now we encourage you to come and share your views, share your feedback, things that you noticed. You might even still have questions, and we're committed to answering those. This is a long planning process, and the CVRD is committed to making sure that we are engaged with the community throughout it. So I will be wrapping up now. We'll be stopping the recording shortly and posting it on the CVRD, Connect CVRD site in the coming days. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who has taken their valuable time today to join us. This has been the first webinar for the liquid waste management planning process. I hope it's been educational, interesting, enlightening. Thank you for the consultants and the CVRD staff for sharing their time today. We look forward to connecting again in person or online. And with that, I wish everyone a wonderful afternoon in the Comox Valley or wherever you may be dialing in from. Thank you very much.